Thank you for being here. I'm Jisoo Oh. I'm a TESOL student in Reflective Practice and Action Research class. The topic area I'm going to research is my students' engagement during my reading explanations. At the end of the presentation, you will know the two cycle processes that I conducted and know the results together. Action research is an important professional skill for language teachers who want to understand their classrooms, their teaching, and their students. But the traditional way of education in which the classroom could be an isolated place for teachers, and teachers can share professional problems or receive advice from colleagues. Because they are involved in many activities, such as planning, guiding, arranging activities, evaluating, and feedback. Whereas in the process of exploratory action research, EAR, there are more details at what engaging the teacher exploring practice and then acting on their findings to improve the situation. I'm going to start with my puzzle. How was it sensed? What does it look like? Why is it important? And think of the questions that need to be answered. Then show you how I collect information to answer the questions being asked. In my second cycle, I will implement an action plan with my research questions. I'm teaching English to a 9-year-old student as a tutor. He graduated from the English kindergarten where I was in. He has inquisitive mind and is interested in reading books regardless of native language and English to get various information. The boy is attending a private elementary school in Seoul. His school conducts 4 hours of English class per week according to the guidelines of the Ministry of Education, and values English reading from the first grade. Since regular English classes will be held from third grade, I'm trying to educate more diverse reading and words. We use 2 materials in class, Worldly Wise and Time for Kids articles. I start the research with my puzzle, not a problem to settle at once. One day, when I had tried to explain the use of frequent words and interpret the sentences one by one, my student who had enjoyed knowing current events and talking about his experiences, but he looked abstract and bored. He seemed unable to be engaged in my reading comprehension explanation. He was not engaged during my explanation, and I find the potential topic in my puzzling situation. Why is my student not engaged during my reading explanations? It's a focus area that matters in my reading class. For planning to explore, how can teachers formulate good exploratory research questions? Good exploratory research questions include the following. Study-oriented aimed at studying or reviewing situations rather than acting on them. It should be a measurable question to answer how students feel when I ask a question. And it should be accurate, specific, and well-defined questions that are not too general and vague. Also, realistic and topic-focused questions are needed for feasible answers. Thus, the following is my research question to explore one's own perception and others' perceptions. What's a good explanation during reading? What are my students feeling about my explanations during reading? I used reflective writing to explore my perception. What's a good and effective reading explanation? I tried to write freely after the class, as thoughts come to my mind. And later, I emphasized some words with highlighting pen. This data source is a good way to explore my own perception in relation to a particular topic or question. However, clear criteria were needed to distinguish whether my explanation was effective or not. So, I searched for others' written ideas on the topic from a textbook. Comprehension Instruction by Austin. The textbook shows strategies that a reading comprehension class should have. Awareness of text organization can contribute to students' understanding. The two main text structures, expository and narrative, each make different demands on the reader's comprehension. First, expository reading instruction. Teachers gradually list to students of responsibility for strategy use, with the goal that students apply strategies independently, is one of the most important features for comprehension. Out of them, having predictive activities before reading is a great activity to help set the purpose of reading. The next, narrative text featuring characters, settings, themes, problems, and sequence of the plot can be found in short stories, folk tales, fables, fantasy, and even news. To help students understand the narrative, teachers should focus on discussions on story elements and encourage students to relate story events and characters to their experiences. It also helps them recall specific story elements by preparing visual guides such as story maps. I wonder how other teachers applied expository reading strategies to class. So, I searched for activity for expository reading on a website called Pinterest. Then, I visited Becky's blog. She introduced a prediction activity with nonfiction. She helped her students choose a discovery book to have plenty of text features. And she asked students to look through the text features. Next, I visited Amy's blog. She introduces many resources to develop active and thoughtful reading in her blog. To promote the thoughts during the reading, she showed a resource that incorporates 6 essential strategies into reading practice. The activity needs 6 color sticky notes and is associated each of the following comprehension strategies to a particular color. She teaches her students how to pause periodically, make connection, ask questions, and form inferences with the activity. This strategy aims to become a natural exercise for their independent reading. What are my students' feelings about my explanations during reading? To explore my students' perceptions, I prepared some questions in consideration of the following 5 qualitative question characteristics. Rather than quantitative questions that provide limited answers, qualitative questions were opened and used to help understand what people think or feel. In addition, quantitative data analysis includes counting, but qualitative data tends to involve coding necessary to analyze, labeling ideas, so that similar ideas can be easily grouped. I conducted a verbal interview in Korean and English, and my student used Korean, which was easy to answer. What do you think about the explanations that I give? What are the good aspects and bad aspects of my explanations during reading? What kind of activities or teacher explanations would you like to do in reading class? Analyzing qualitative data tends to involve coding. Labeling ideas can easily group similar ideas together. I gave more than one code to a single statement and used symbols like plus for like or minus for dislike. Then, bigger codes, which are called categories, include codes that will like one another and therefore have been put together. The information was collected from my written reflection, a textbook about appropriate reading strategies, others' written ideas, and chat with my student. I could find that my student got bored easily with my repetitive explanations. And various visual materials help my student understand the text. For the second cycle, I'm going to plan to change. But I have to make lesson plans to find which activity is more engaging for my student among the activities. So I wrote my self-reflection for the second cycle and prepared visual materials from the internet with second private chat with my student. I will ask and answer these research questions. Is my student more engaged when I use the new reading activities? Among the activities, which activity is more engaging to my student? I conducted 2 activities based on Becky and Amy's activities to observe changes. This is a lesson plan about prediction with non-fiction text. I've got a prediction worksheet from Becky's blog and reading comprehension material from Twinkle. Twinkle is an online educational publishing house producing teaching materials. Before reading, ask the reader to look through the text features and explain them, such as bold font, italic font, underlined words, or photographs. Then, write down what can be expected and why. After reading all the articles, have a feedback conversation to see if some of the things were resolved with what we expected to consolidate this activity. For the next activity, I used Amy's color coding activity. I've got the teaching material from Twinkle too. Firstly, I explained the categories that were classified by colored notes. Make prediction on the green. Monitor comprehension on pink. Ask questions on orange and opinions on yellow. During the reading, I showed the actual photos of the sun and explained difficult words such as structures of the sun were shown by Google Photos. Asked him how to pose periodically, make connections, ask questions, and form inferences. And he wrote and drew the content on the colored notes. After reading, when he solved applied questions, he could find color memos easily in the paragraph. After the class, I wrote down how much is involved in learning, how long each activity took, and what materials I needed and used during the class. Through this, I could know which activities were more engaging, took longer than expected, and thought of reasons why. In a conducted interview in each cycle, I asked almost the same question to compare coded qualitative answers. The third question was changed to the question of which of the 2 activities was more engaged, and the other 2 questions were interviewed with the same questions as the first cycle. When I asked him about the changing explanations, he said it's much more fun and the actual photos helped him to understand. For the next question, he replied more actively that he is interested in science these days. Lastly, when I asked him which of the two activities that took place for 2 weeks were more engaged, he answered that the color coding activity was more engaged him, because he could draw pictures to understand the contents, and it gave him some hints while solving the problems. According to my self-reflections, he seemed to be more active in explaining the subject and participating in the class. He talked a lot about his interest and drew pictures on his notes to explain them. Difficult words or phrases help to understand with interview images or Kids Dictionary. This helped my students continue to focus on reading without losing concentration. However, it was too delayed, and it took a long time to choose various photos every week. While doing EAR, I was able to understand my practice and realized that I could learn myself from what I taught and focus to listen to my students. Exploratory behavior research to improve the situation shows how to go through a series of processes. It helps me develop more confidence in my teaching experience and capabilities. Formulating research questions, choosing methods, planning and conducting research, analyzing and reflecting on data is expected to be much easier and more fun over time. And I look forward to future exploration in my class. Thank you for your attention. If anyone would like more information or has questions, please feel free to contact me.